Regular programming will not be seen today, so we can bring you this News 4 special.
Whoever knows something, please give us closure. Please come home if you're there. We miss you so much.
A desperate plea from two families.
Somebody knows something. Everybody's not dead.
Accusations of threats.
If you go to this gospel concert, there is going to be consequences.
Abuse.
He put the gun next to her head and he just jerked her hair.
And deceit.
He did not pass that lie detector test.
Two women and a toddler vanish on a low-country road.
What do you mean she didn't come home last night?
Rumors quickly forming into theories.
He said an officer was involved.
Searches.
They broke up semen at this place, semen at that place.
And a massive demolition.
The bodies are buried at the house.
These families clinging to hope that answers are out there.
Help us. Bring them home.
It's a case we've been investigating for more than a year, but these families have been asking questions for nearly 4 decades. What happened to Linda McCord, Sarah Boyd, and her 2.5-year-old daughter, Kimberly? Why have they never been found? We sit down with both families to share shocking stories that have never been told. Plus, the desperate plea from one of the original investigators on the case turned sheriff before he retires. This is Bring Them Home, an ABC News 4 exclusive series aimed at solving cold cases in the Lowcountry.
It's been exactly 37 years since that fateful night, April 3rd, 1987. Sarah Boyd and her toddler invited by her friend Linda to a gospel concert in Walterboro. Soulful singing on a Friday night in the South. The weather was cool, low 50s with a breeze, but it didn't stop Sarah from throwing on a pretty beige dress printed with flowers. Her niece Tiffany remembers the moment Sarah and Kimberly walked out the door.
My grandmother picked him up and gave her a kiss, and she said, "I see you tomorrow, boo. I see you tomorrow, boo."
32-year-old Sarah, an ambitious administrative assistant at the old Norman C. Toole Middle School in North Charleston, the second born of 4 sisters.
She was like the glue to the family.
Her 2.5-year-old daughter was her mini-me, a beautiful pageant girl who always wore a smile. Sarah's sister Kathy tells me Sarah prayed for a child for years. Mom and daughter were attached at the hip.
Beautiful bond. You didn't see one without the other.
The pair hopped in their friend Linda's car, a 77 blue Lincoln, and drove off. Sarah's husband Philip, her high school sweetheart, was expecting the two home late that night, but they never returned. Tiffany remembers the next morning.
What do you mean she didn't come home last night? I saw them yesterday. They were leaving to go to the gospel program.
A frantic search began.
And we had family get in their personal vehicles and pickup trucks. Their children in the back of it, I remember. They're just searching, just driving up and down dirt roads and different avenues, just searching.
It was if they vanished.
It's just strange that 3 lives disappeared and no one seems to know anything.
No, nothing.
The biggest piece of evidence in the case of the missing 3 was found 2 days after they were last seen, here at Wells Crossroad, the intersection of Highway 15 and 176 in Orangeburg County. Linda's blue Lincoln abandoned on the side of the road. But how did it get here and what was inside? Both questions investigators needed to answer, but they never even had a chance to dust for fingerprints.
That was a big problem for all of us that were working the case.
Dorchester County Sheriff L.C. Knight was with state police back then, one of the original detectives on the case. His father, Carl, was a local sheriff and led the investigation. According to Sheriff Knight, someone called Linda's husband, John, and told him they saw their Lincoln on the side of the road. By the time investigators got there, it had been moved, taken to a car shop because it had broken down. Who moved it? According to Sheriff Knight, Linda's husband, John, and a lieutenant, William Martin, with the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office. Knight says John and Martin were friends. Did Martin not know the women were missing? Dorchester County detectives eventually went through the car, but too many people had been in it to gather useful evidence. The process of investigations has evolved over the years. What hasn't changed? The golden rule. Don't touch or move anything until a crime scene is processed or evidence is collected. The Orangeburg County lieutenant would have known that. I asked the sheriff if the same situation happened today, would it be considered unusual?
I don't know. I mean, again, I think William didn't think anything was wrong. I got to stand with him, and I might have to eat these words, but right now I feel like William was straightforward. He thought he was helping a friend, not doing anything wrong.
Orangeburg County Sheriff Leroy Ravenel can't speak to his office's protocol back then, but he understands why this seems suspicious.
That won't be okay today, not with our protocol. I mean, a lot has changed since, 37 years ago.
This isn't the last we'll hear about Lieutenant Martin. Orangeburg County isn't the lead agency on the case. It's Dorchester. The reason? The location where the women were last seen by a preacher and his wife who were at the gospel concert.
Told us that they passed them on 50 in Dorchester County, coming towards St. George.
The couple couldn't make out who was behind the wheel of the blue Lincoln, but it's the last known sighting of the missing three. Sheriff Knight said the couple also saw another car traveling slowly behind them.
But he wasn't sure it was following them or whether it was just happened to be a car that was caught up behind them.
Investigators never made contact with the driver traveling behind Linda's Lincoln, but the location where the car was found still has them puzzled. Remember, the women were traveling from Walterboro. Linda had to drop off Sarah and Kimberly near the Ridgeville area before heading home to Harleyville. So how did they end up at Wells Crossroad?
You got to make a hang of a turn to come back to get to Ridgeville. So they were not even thinking about getting to Ridgeville. Whatever happened carried them to Wells, whether it was leaving or somebody had them kidnapped or whatever, it was intentional.
Sheriff Knight looked into the theory that the women just up and left to start a new life. That didn't pan out. Investigators also tracked down the gospel group based out of Raleigh that they went to see at what was then Walterboro High School. They found nothing.
I think all the investigators involved think that something bad's happened to them.
When we return, what was Linda's relationship with her husband?
Her husband, John, had threatened to kill her if she left him.
Plus, what Linda's mother saw the night her daughter vanished, and the reason the truth never made it to police.
Exactly 37 years have passed since Linda, Sarah, and Kimberly were last seen. The faces of two 32-year-old black women plastered all over the Low Country. Little Kimberly's picture posted on milk cartons and the backs of tractor trailers. Reward money was raised for information leading to an arrest, but nothing. Linda's cousin Gwendolyn questions how hard investigators worked.
How much pressure was actually applied to get some answers that was so needed 30-some years ago.
She grew up next door to Linda in Harleyville. They were more like sisters than cousins.
My dad even created a path where we could walk from one house to the other.
Linda loved music, playing the clarinet as a child before becoming a majorette at her high school in Camden. She met John McCord when he was working at Bilton Ford in Holly Hill right after she graduated from Claflin University. The two built a house on her mom's property and got married, much to the dismay of Linda's family and friends.
I never did like John. It was something about his disposition that I did not care for.
Linda's family shared her mother's photos. As you can see, the faces of some young men are scratched out. These were Linda's dates to various school dances. Cousins Gwendolyn, Debbie, and Tanya tell me that John damaged the photos that were taken years before the two even met. Precious memories tainted. People warned her not to marry John.
There was a history of domestic violence and
with him because
she would tell us about,
What would she tell you?
That, they had a fight and then he beat her up. I think they were in the mother's house then.
No, there was a time where he beat her up and she came to my house and she had the black eye.
Horrifying stories of physical abuse.
She said he had her lay down on the bed. He put the gun next to her head and he just jerked her hair out of her head, handfuls of her hair. So I said, well, why are you still there? She said, because I can't leave because he'll find me.
They don't think Linda ever told police.
She was nervous She just said she could not take it any longer.
The cousins have a theory about what happened when Linda was driving Sarah and Kimberly home and the reason her Lincoln was traveling so slow.
I think he did it. Because it's not the first time they say he did that.
Tampered with the car.
Tampered with the car.
That's why the car was driving slow and another car was
Following him.
Mechanics later determined the Lincoln's freezer plug had blown out and the engine overheated the night the women vanished. Linda's cousins recalled an example of the alleged vehicle tampering at a concert in Columbia.
When Linda started the car after the concert, it wouldn't start. And then he walks up with the part in his hand that he had taken from under the hood so the car wouldn't start, and then he put it back under there so they could come home.
Linda wasn't the only person afraid of John. Her mom was too. She died 2 years after Linda vanished, holding on to one clue that was never told to investigators about what and who she saw walk through her front door the night the three vanished: John and his nephew.
It was late that night, the same night Linda supposedly they disappeared. They both came in. They were extremely sweaty, a lot of dirt, a lot of mud on their boots or something that they had on, because she was very immaculate. Her house was like, you know, you could almost lick off the floor, that kind of housekeeping, you know. So she was concerned about that. She said, but not overly, because he did construction work. My aunt never admitted to those cops that there was a problem in that marriage. And I think that's...
Why do you think she did that?
Probably afraid of
She
John.
was scared of him. I think she was scared
he's
of
crazy.
him.
He was crazy.
John's statement to the Dorchester County Sheriff's Office that night was different. He told an officer he got home from his construction job at 7:30. Linda wasn't home. He left and went to check on some cement he poured earlier that day at work. Then he went to the Piggly Wiggly to drink some beer and arrived at Linda's mother's house around 11. That aligns with her mother's story, but this report and subsequent interviews don't include anything about another person with John.
My interview with him, and like I said, we sat there for several hours. John never mentioned anybody with him. He told me step by step. He went here, here, here. He never said we. He said I.
He told deputies he went to Ridgeville to look for Linda after midnight, then came back to Harleyville, out to Holly Hill, Vance, and Santee, where he got some gas. He said he was out all night looking for Linda and didn't arrive home alone until 5 o'clock the next morning, Saturday, April 4th. Our efforts to track down the supposed nephew John was with that night fell short. Linda's cousins couldn't remember his name. Sheriff Knight told us John never obtained an attorney. He willingly sat down for interviews until he was asked about taking a lie detector test.
Until we got in the polygraph, I thought he cooperated pretty darn good, but like I said, he just stopped me at that point.
John claimed a prior polygraph test on an unrelated accusation showed he was guilty when he claimed innocence. We can't sit down with John to ask him our questions. He died in 2018, but we called his family to give them an opportunity to respond to all of these allegations. They hung up on me. We couldn't find any court records of domestic abuse during John and Linda's marriage, but we did discover he was found guilty by bench trial in 1993 for assault and battery. He was also charged in the late 80s with pointing a firearm at a person. That's a felony in South Carolina.
And I'm just going to speak blatantly. John was one that many people feared, from my understanding growing up.
I had the feeling during the investigation that several of them did not like him. I didn't realize they feared him.
Sarah's sister, Breatha, has her own story about an encounter with John McCord. Her daughter, Tiffany, shared it with me.
She would see John following her home, right? And then he would turn off. There were times where she would be in the house and she would see him coming through the backyard, and she didn't know why. I mean, this is all after the disappearance of my aunt. So he was very creepy. He was weird, very weird.
Tiffany said John never approached her mother. He was just there, watching. But there is one piece of information that may give some insight into the investigation. It's something the sheriff told Debbie when she was working as a dispatcher at the Dorchester County Sheriff's Office. She spent 44 years there and was close with her boss.
He could not touch him with a 10-foot pole.
This was the sheriff said that?
He was protected, I know for sure, by Orangeburg County investigators, detectives, whoever. He was untouchable.
Similar feelings shared by both victims' families.
Every time seemed like there was something with John, that same guy, I think his name was William T. Martin or something like that.
William Martin is the lieutenant with Orangeburg County who helped John move the car from Wells Crossroad, where it was found 2 days after the three vanished. Sheriff Leroy Ravenel wasn't with Orangeburg County in 1987, but he knows Martin and was shocked to hear both families' accusations.
I hope that's not the case, but I have no knowledge, no idea.
However, he understands where they're coming from.
These are family members of missing people for 30-some years, so, they have that right and, to feel that way, and maybe they know something that I don't know.
He recalled his experience with the man they're talking about.
Firm and fair and consistent. Well, he was the main captain when I came on, but he was a good officer and a good captain.
William Martin retired from Orangeburg County in 1997, 10 years after Linda, Sarah, and Kimberly vanished. Sheriff Ravenel told us the former captain has been sick for a few years. Our attempts to reach him were unsuccessful. When we come back,
digging for bodies. It was told that the bodies are buried at the house or on the land.
A house demolished in Orangeburg because of a tip. 3 bodies buried beneath.
You think something was found?
I think so. I think so.
The biggest break in the case of the missing 3 came some 33 years after Linda McCord and Sarah and Kimberly Boyd vanished. In 2020, Sheriff Ravenel received a tip that the 3 were buried under concrete here on this property in Santee. It just so happened to be concrete that authorities say John poured years ago. The current owner was doing a renovation at the time but allowed investigators in. So Sheriff Ravenel asked a bold question.
Do you mind if I tear the whole house down? And he was okay.
Sheriff Ravenel called Dorchester County Sheriff L.C. Knight.
I gathered my troops, we went up and got with them, went out to the house.
Crews spent 3 days conducting meticulous work in early June. The concrete removed piece by piece. Radar tools helped them search deep in the dirt. News of the search spread fast.
Kitty, someone called me and they really adamant about that they found something there.
Could this be it? A tip placing the lead suspect at the scene where 3 bodies could be buried. Can deputies finally answer what happened to Linda, Sarah, and Kimberly?
We were hoping to find something. There was nothing.
No bodies, no bones.
I tell you, the saddest part was the last day walking away from there.
Sarah's family remembers the conversation they had with Sheriff Knight.
He said, believe me, I was praying and hoping for hope for you all to have closure as well.
That's exactly what he said.
He said, but there was nothing there.
Doubt still lingers today.
Do you think something was found?
I think so. I think so.
Sheriff Ravenel told me security patrolled the home in Santee 24 hours a day to protect the search. And Sheriff Knight backs up that claim. Linda, Sarah, and Kimberly were not buried under that concrete.
While I was there, nothing was found.
Skepticism, perhaps, because this isn't the first search involving concrete in one of the husbands.
Every time they reopened the case or got a tip, they broke up semen at this place, semen at that place. But yet both Uncle Philip and John worked for the cement plant.
Sarah's husband, Philip, worked at Giant Cement Company in Harleyville, and so did John. Authorities searched the grounds years ago and found nothing. Sheriff Knight told me Philip has always showed remorse for his wife and daughter and still calls him today to ask about the case. Sarah's family called Philip a great uncle and a loving dad. They remain close with him despite the results of a polygraph.
It was one question on there regarding if he was having an affair. I remember it like clockwork. He did not pass that lie detector test. We looked at him a different way. How could you do this to a nice person who always had your back?
Do you think he was involved?
No.
No.
3 years after Sarah and Kimberly's disappearance, Philip had them declared dead. He no longer lives in the Lowcountry. He remarried and had a son. We asked to talk with Philip, but he wasn't interested. Both Sheriff Ravenel and Sheriff Knight have their own theories about what happened 37 years ago today.
I think some may have taken it to the grave.
Something occurred to them, and John was involved in it. There was more than one person involved. I don't think he could handle 3 individuals, 3 graves, and still get home at the time he said he got.
I sat down with Sarah's family on what would have been her 69th birthday. They have never given up hope.
You were never forgotten. You still remain alive in our lives. Your family still loves you.
Whoever knows something, please give us closure.
They share a simple plea.
Help us bring them home.
If you know anything about the disappearance of Linda McCord and Sarah and Kimberly Boyd, call the Dorchester County Sheriff's Office. The number's on your screen, 843-832-0300.